Hello everyone, welcome to Final Fantasy XIV Beginner's Guide. Today I'll be continuing my 3-part guide to playing DPS. We'll be taking a look at melee DPS and how to handle playing them without panicking about uptime or mechanics. While I'll be talking about some specifics to help you play better, I won't be going too in-depth about each job. If after watching this video you're still interested in trying out these jobs or learning more about them, there's great resources such as the Battle Discord server where you can find every in-depth guide about all of the jobs mentioned in these videos. To start off with the obvious basics, as a melee DPS, your job is trying to stay in range of the mobs that you're hitting as much as possible in order to deal damage while making sure you don't mess up any mechanics. Each of the melee DPS have specific things that define their unique identity across the role. There's only two major things you need to keep in mind. The first thing are positionals. All melees have specific skills or abilities that gain benefits from hitting a mob from a specific side of their hitbox. You'll notice in the tooltips that it mentions attacking from the rear or the flank. Your goal as a melee is to try to hit these as often as possible. It may seem like a difficult task when you're new, especially if while practicing you meet tanks that kinda like to play DJ with the boss, making hitting positionals an absolute nightmare. Alternatively, they take the boss out for a walk in the park and you kinda have to chase after it. Yeah, that's not really fun. Let's take a closer look at positionals. Flank and rear are a very broad term that can be very confusing to new players. When you target an enemy, you'll see that the ring appears under its hitbox. You can use that ring to understand where a positional starts and where it ends. The empty area behind the ring is considered the rear, while the point where the ring starts is where the flank begins. This means you don't actually need to run a lot around the boss to hit your positionals. You can instead sit around this area and just dance left, right to land your positionals consistently, which on larger enemies will help you a lot. There are duties where these positionals aren't a thing, such as deep dungeons or exploration duties, Eureka or Boja, even some larger bosses in normal raid content. Bosses or mobs in this area will have a full ring under them, meaning that they are omnidirectional, so you can get your positionals from anywhere you stand around the mob. Now that we've discussed how to get positionals, you might be wondering, is it even worth it to go for positionals? I'll say that it's not worth delaying an attack for the sake of getting a positional in, since that makes you lose more DPS than missing a positional in the long run, especially if you delay frequently. If you can't make it to this spot to hit a positional, don't let that stop you from hitting the boss at all. You want to keep your GCD rolling. If we are to get into the meat of the information, aka the technicalities of hitting or missing a positional, that entirely depends on the job. Every melee gains different skill potencies or benefits. For example, Samurai gains more gauge from hitting positionals, Dragoon gets access to Raider Trust if they hit the right positionals, and Monk lands a guaranteed crit on Bullshine if they land that positional, which ends up generating a guaranteed chakra stack. Sadly, Nin only gains extra damage from positionals as of Shadowbringers, but that might change in the future. All of these, however, are pretty sizable losses that you don't want to ignore. Not to mention that always being on your toes and doing positionals while doing the mechanics is what makes melee fun. It's why I personally main Nin and why I love the role so much. Melees get involved in a fight in a way that's not just doing the mechanics in the same way you'd be doing it as a caster, for example. It's a different aspect you have to consider when optimizing your gameplay. Speaking of optimization, you might not always be able to hit positionals because of how some mechanics work. There are ways around this, however. The biggest solution is the melee roll action True North. It allows you to ignore positionals for 10 seconds whenever you use it on a 45-second cooldown. It won't always be available, but you do get 2 charges, so it can be used multiple times if you need to, but you want to plan your usage in such a way that you time True North with mechanics where you're stuck on one side of the boss or even in front of it. Monk also has a mini True North in the form of Riddle of Earth. That ability has 3 charges, but with the duration of only 6 seconds or 3 GCD skills. As I mentioned earlier though, when you're just starting out and you're doing dungeons with a tank that just drags mobs all over the place, don't worry that much about always getting your positionals. Once you get AoE abilities, you'll just AoE down packs of enemies instead of worrying about positionals anyway, meaning you only have to do them on bosses. If the tank moves the boss around erratically, then don't worry about your performance in that case, it's no fault to you. If you understand what you need to be doing, then that's the best you can do in that situation. So, positionals are a big part of melee DPS gameplay, but I said earlier that there's 2 major aspects to playing the role. The second element is being able to stay in the range of bosses to land as many attacks as possible, also known by a term I said earlier, Uptime. This uptime allows you to keep the flow of your job going, and while some fights are impossible to have a continuous flow either by forced downtime or with mechanics that make it so you are unable to stay close to the boss, there are plenty of times where you can bypass this to keep hitting the boss as much as possible. If you're a beginner, don't sweat about uptime too much. Most content in the game is designed so it's beatable even if you don't have perfect uptime, sometimes even if you have less than 80%. That means you don't have to be a melee guy that knows everything about the job to do the content. If you are nervous about a new fight, focus on learning the mechanics first. You need to learn how the fight goes so you can learn how and where you can get uptime for that fight, meaning you won't know how to improve your uptime until you get through the mechanics at least once. Once you're comfortable with the fight, you can start looking at your gameplay and figure out what you're doing wrong and what parts of it can be changed so you can get more uptime in the long run. Maybe you dodge something too early, or maybe you play a bit too safe. These are extremely normal reactions to doing new content, so you want to take the time and analyze the fight to figure out times where you could hit the boss while spending less time dodging. Usually when new fights come out, the strats that are designed at first may force you to play safe, but the further in the tier we go, the better the strats that come out, which allow you to get more uptime. Ironically, some of these later strats are actually less risky than the ones that come out initially, so always be open to trying out new stuff. From this point of the video onwards, all of the things I will be saying will mainly be for those that have decided if they want to main melees, and it will be related to greeding. What greeding means is basically you trying to squeeze out every possible second of hitting the boss, and is the final end goal of any melee player in terms of improvement. There are a few ways of doing this, but the main one would be playing down to the wire, learning when abilities come out and basically testing to see how much you can push the limit until you either die or find the sweet spot. A lot of enemy spell animations deal the damage as soon as the cast bar is over, so you can dash back in because the animation is actually safe, but you already know that, you greedy goblin you. Fair warning though, when you do start playing this way, expect to get hit, expect to die, expect to make mistakes, and expect to incur the wrath of every single healer in your area. Bonus points if you catch that joke, by the way. At the end of the day, it's called greeding because these are usually the outcomes, especially when you first do it in a fight, but it really helps with pushing your output and impressing people when you can get used to things like these. Maybe you do something like dodging an AoE in the time between your global cooldowns, then going back to the boss and flawlessly continuing your rotation. And sometimes you want to wait until the last second to hit your backflip to safety as a dragoon, land on the spot where you're supposed to be, then jump back to the boss and nothing happen. You may have seen people doing it and looking cool while doing it, but you will screw it up at least a few times until you get used to it. There's a lot of job specific ways to improve this level optimization that we call greeding, so we'll have to get into specifics if you want to get deep into that, but as I said earlier, it won't be something that I'll do in this video. Let's look at some other things we can do to improve uptime, such as the use of another role action skill, Arm's Length. This skill will prevent knockbacks, and while you can simply use it to avoid getting knocked around the arena or away from the boss, there are encounters where it can be used in a fashion that maximizes uptime. The idea is to find a balance between utilizing it to save a few GCDs and just keep hitting the boss, and using it to save your own life and possibly achieve the first goal at the same time. You can also use movement skills to mitigate knockbacks as well, even the ones with stuns if you have precise timing. It's tempting to use your gap closers whenever they're available to do damage, but once you've gotten the hang of fights, you'll know when to preserve your gap closer charges so you can quickly return to the boss and continue inflicting damage. At the end of the day, you want to do whatever it takes to keep hitting the boss while avoiding having yourself killed. Remember that greed is only greed if you get hit by the boss, otherwise it's optimization. From this point onwards, things you do to improve damage will come mainly from fight-specific strategies or fight-specific tricks. For example, Dragoon's Gears Kogul can hit from pretty far away and still hit the boss, instead of using Piercing Talon, which frankly is pretty pathetic in terms of damage. Monk has Meditate to press to generate chakra stacks when there's nothing to hit, and Form Shift to prepare them for the boss returns. Samurai has Meditation to build gauge and meditation stacks, and Ninja can utilize ninjutsu during downtime if the timing permits. There is also the consideration that some fights have you fight against multiple enemies. If we go back to our previous example and use Dragoon again, lining mobs up for your Gears Kogul nets you more damage. There's a lot of little things that allow you to optimize damage, and again, I cannot get too specific or will be here for a pretty long time. Each job also has its own buffs and utilities to assist them. Trick attack timing on Ninja, for example, and how that lines up with the team's burst. Consider your position as Monk when you pop Brotherhood in order to hit the entire party with it, same with Litany on Dragoon. As a Dragoon, you also have to consider who you want to tether and who does the most damage at that moment. It's these little things that add up and lead you to job mastery and improving your contribution to the party. All melees have some form of survival ability gained from the rest of their role actions. Second Wind and Bloodbath allow you to assist healers with healing yourself. Healers will love you if you use this, and they can save your life if used in the right moment. Feint reduces the enemy's physical attributes, which reduces the damage the tank takes, and in some cases the damage that the entire party takes. Sadly, it's not as commonly used as Caster's Adel, and to be honest, in some cases it might as well not exist due to how few mechanics there are that actually get mitigated by it. There's also joystick tools like Mog's Mantra that increase healing received of all those around you, or Ninja's Shade Shift in case you need a quick shield. Always be considering these tools even when doing damage. I'll also talk a bit about Leg Sweep. It's a role action that works more or less the same as the tank one, with the exception of the cooldown being longer and the stun duration being shorter. It doesn't work on a lot of major bosses, and even on bosses that can be stunned, it's smarter to just let the tank stun because of the differences previously mentioned. Be ready to use it occasionally though, since some mobs need to be chain CC'd or crowd controlled, so you'll need to use Leg Sweep then. If played right, melee can be an incredibly engaging and fun role. The positionals scare new players away, but remember that no matter what job you play, you will still be spending time to learn its ins and outs anyway. And no one really expects you to play it perfectly from the get-go. If you enjoy positionals and you really want to learn them, then this is a role that you will enjoy a lot, at least in my opinion. That doesn't mean you might not prefer caster or range DPS, maybe even tank or healer instead, but now that you know the basics and some more advanced stuff about melees, go in there and do all the damage possible. That's gonna be it from me and this guide about melees for beginners. Thank you to the people that watch this even if they don't have anything in particular to learn. Next video guide will be about range physical DPS, and I'll be trying to put out one video a week at least until Endwalker. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and I'll be seeing you in the next one. Take care!